Hey, Pastor Tommy here with this week's recap and sermon teaser. Last week I preached on the crossing of the Red Sea. Remember, God makes a way in the Jesus Storybook Bible. And one of the things that struck me as most interesting about that passage, if you haven't seen it, it's Exodus chapter 14, is when Israel escapes from Egypt, God sends them in a direction that seems more difficult because if they had gone straight to Canaan, the Philistines would have been in the way and they would have become discouraged and just turned back to Egypt. And if you remember, there was one of the big points and lessons of that passage was that sometimes God sends us down a difficult path to keep us from an unwinnable fight, or that sometimes God sends us down a difficult path to keep us from something even worse. And one of the applications I made is with COVID, maybe with COVID that God is using it for something else. Maybe we'll be thankful someday that COVID happened, as miserable as we seem right now. But, it also struck me, I didn't have time to talk about it in the sermon. I read a book recently. When I recently finished my Doctor of Ministry, and for 4 years I had to read what everyone else told me to read. 5,000 or 6,000 pages a year, and then for my own thesis I had to read thousands of pages on security and safety and government documents. And then I finished in March. I was finally able to read what I wanted to read. And what do I like to read? I like to read what I like to read, whatever sort of catches my fancy. And one of the books I recently finished was entitled The Mosquito, A Human History of Our Deadliest Predator. It just caught my eye. I grew up in South Florida and I thought, mosquitoes, that would be interesting. Now let me ask you this question. If you could get rid of mosquitoes, would you? I know I don't have to ask who likes mosquitoes because no one does. But if you could get rid of mosquitoes, would you? With only one caveat. If you could get rid of mosquitoes but lose everything that humanity has gained up to this point because of mosquitoes, would you? And if you said yes, I think you might be foolish. Why is that? Let me give you a brief recap of that book. It's actually pretty cool. That in human history, half of all humans who have ever lived have died of mosquito-borne illnesses. Skirt! Right? They think that probably about 108 billion people have ever lived, and 52 billion or so have died of mosquito-borne illnesses. Last year, only 830,000 people died of mosquito-borne illnesses. And I say only because the year before it was 2 million, and before that it was even more. The Gates Foundation has been helping with malaria medicine and things, but it's just interesting to me how we make a big deal over 200,000 COVID deaths, which that is a big deal, when 1 million people a year are dying from mosquito-borne illness. And it gets even bigger than that. Mosquitoes killed Alexander the Great. Mosquitoes killed Oliver Cromwell. Mosquitoes have killed lots of famous people. George Washington had malaria. In fact, the person who wrote this book, Timothy Weingart, makes the case the reason we won the Revolutionary War was because of mosquitoes. In other words, in 1750 in South Carolina, like 80% of people under 20 died from mosquitoes. And yet, in the time between 1750 and 1775 or 1776, we sort of gotten not immune to malaria and mosquito-borne illnesses, but we actually got basically stronger. And on top of that, when we threw the tea into the water in Boston Tea Party and started drinking coffee, coffee helps with malaria. So by 1776, the people who lived in the United States were relatively resistant to malaria, but the British soldiers weren't. And so 40% of them succumbed to mosquito-borne illnesses. Mosquitoes are probably why we have slavery, or at least we had slavery like we did. Why? Because people in Africa were much more seasoned to mosquito-borne illness. And so when you brought Irish over in the 18th and 17th century, they died from mosquitoes. But Africans were more hardy because of where they lived. And so that just boomed. And that was a great evil, but it was caused by mosquitoes. Columbus, think about Columbus. When Columbus came to the New World, it's estimated that there were 100 million natives in the New World. And by the time everything was said and done, 95 million of them were killed because Columbus unknowingly brought mosquito-borne illness to the Americas and also smallpox. And so it's like, whoa. In 1939, DDT got rid of mosquitoes. I mean, I could talk about mosquitoes. What's my point here? My point is just this, that even mosquitoes serve some purpose in God's plan. Mosquitoes were responsible for the rise of the Roman Empire, and they were also responsible for the fall of the Roman Empire. Basically, anything that has happened because of mosquitoes. And God has been orchestrating it all. We are here because why we're here because of what God has done through mosquitoes, among other things. Why do I bring this up? One, it's a cool book, right? I love doing book reports, and you ought to check it out if you're interested in that kind of thing. It talks about who's more susceptible. Some people are more tasty, apparently, to mosquitoes than others. I'm not, fortunately. But the other reason I bring it up is just because when we look around us, it's easy to be very discouraged and think things are so hard now. They've never been this hard. When in fact, things have been a lot harder in the history of the world. They've been a lot harder in the history of the United States. And we are just in this time where it is difficult. I mean, last night I thought of this book because last night I was watching the presidential debates and I thought, this is like a train wreck into a dumpster fire, right? I mean, I was just like, I couldn't believe what I was watching. That's not political commentary on either presidential candidate. That's actually political commentary on both presidential candidates. But I thought to myself at one point, we survived mosquitoes, we can survive these two. You see, when we consider the gospel, when we look at the stories we've been looking at, if nothing else we learn from all the stories we've been looking at in the Jesus Storybook Bible sermon series, is that God makes a way and that God continues to work things out for His glory and for our good, and that one day we will understand the purpose behind all of this. Now, speaking of purpose, this week I'm really excited because we are talking about the 10 Commandments, or the way the Jesus Storybook Bible puts it, 10 ways to be perfect. And why I'm so excited about that is because we are going to talk about the purpose of the 10 Commandments. You ever thought about that? Why do we have, I don't mean the uses of the 10 Commandments, right? There's 3 uses of the law. There's all this theological stuff. But I'm going to ask the question and answer it, hopefully, is why did God give Israel and us the 10 Commandments? Was there purpose behind it? And when? Why did He give the 10 Commandments when He gave the 10 Commandments? So I'm looking forward to seeing you this weekend. I'm looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks because in 2 weeks we have public worship coming up at 4 o'clock on October 11th. And I look forward to seeing you there. A lot of people are doing a lot of work for that. And I'm also encouraged by all of the home groups that are meeting and all of the home groups that are singing together and doing that kind of stuff. All according to the criteria laid out by our dear governor, in case someone wants to call him. Anyhow, I'll see you this weekend. God bless you.